Imagine getting in a coffee shop, in a bar, with a drink in your hands, and your eyes see a calming scene. Do you hear that? It's everywhere. Notice anything? It's jazz. Jazz is a music genre originated in New Orleans, USA, and was spread globally during the 1920s, integrating elements from different styles and culture. It then formed many subgenres. One of them is jazz fusion. In the late 60s and 70s, which started as a mix of jazz and electronic instrument of rock, later it can be defined as any other type of music mixed with jazz. Jazz fusion became popular in Asia, most famously in Japan. But there's a place where jazz fusion is just starting to blossom, an interesting music scene, Hanoi, Vietnam. Jazz in Vietnam was considered the music of the enemy. Then slowly after đổi mới, it got more official recognition, with Mr. Quyền Văn Minh paving the way. Jazz is performed in formal venues and casual clubs. Then jazz fusion started to appear, often a mixture of jazz and Vietnamese folk music. The thing is, what people used to talk about jazz create resistance towards it. Jazz is high culture. It's old, and its fusion is used for political purposes, which makes it hardly reach the young urban. But now it's changing.
How did that happen?
This video will show you that Vietnamese jazz fusion is becoming more well received among young people in Hanoi, thanks to the jazz hybridity discourse and the individual music taste formation through creative culture hubs. Cultural hybridity happens when different cultural areas come together and create new forms, like the mix of music genre. The way jazz hybridity is talked about in Vietnam changed jazz reputation and paves the way for jazz fusion to develop. First, hybridity creates familiarity. Mixing jazz and folk music is said to make jazz more widespread and friendly to the mass audience. Musicians like Quyền Thiện Đắc are passionate about this goal, with some projects such as the Phu Sa Quartet, traditional art form combined with jazz like Chèo, Tuồng, Cải Lương. The 2020 concert, Folklore on Jazz, with the sounds of the Northwest through its traditional flutes, create a harmony that helps the audience easily understand new melodies.
Every Vietnamese will find very familiar to them.
Or like the familiar folk genre among Northern Vietnamese, Quan họ Bắc Ninh. It's played with jazz in Duck's performance on the 8th Theater stage. This musical hybridity has been seen a lot in Vietnam in recent years, like Đức Phúc, or most prominently through Hoàng Thị Linh. Therefore, making this idea of fusing folk with any other type of music more trendy. Through hybridization, jazz is then one step closer to the mass Vietnamese listeners. From this, hybridity is also considered creativity. The elements of jazz are added in with the mass popular music, young pop singers and musicians mixing their own groove into jazz, the so-called old genre of music. For instance, Tuần Nam Fusion concert with young pop singer Soobin Hoàng Sơn, Jazz's show with Thắng, a vocalist of Ngọt Band, singing in jazz style. These images are refreshing to the youth. Even when Quỳnh Anh's 1990X album theme is popular songs about spring through eras of Vietnam from the 1940s, the jazz production made it new and unique. The hybridity of old and young is said to be a vibrant movement of the new jazz generation. Through hybridization, jazz fusion is then one step closer to the young listeners. However, I notice a common thing. There's still a dominance of one genre trait over another. The way jazz hybridity is discussed in Vietnam is mainly about mixing jazz into another and vice versa, rather than together. The synthesis creating an entirely new form of jazz fusion is less talked about, though this idea is still considered to be cool. This is because of the recontextualization of hybridity, transfer and transformation of something from one discourse, context, to another. This behavior can be regarded as fusion. Jazz fusion in its birthplace, America, in the 70s was an effort to recapture audiences, but in the 21st century in Vietnam, it's the effort to capture the mass audience, especially the youth, by making jazz appear friendlier, creative, and unique through fusion. So okay, it's no longer uninviting. Jazz fusion is cool. But that's not all. The formation of tastes and places to reach jazz fusion must be mentioned too. Hanoi's music scene is diverse and interesting, a blend of antique and contemporary. The city is home to many jazz pioneers and rising artists. The art appreciation culture was cultivated in each Hanoian. From traditional, classical, to indie, there's always a music place for anyone in Hanoi. The situation and places people are born and raised in help them gain the cultural capital and taste to appreciate art forms. According to Bourdieu, cultural capital takes time and effort to get. It exists in 3 states: embodied, objectified, and institutionalized. People accumulate cultural capital, creating unconscious disposition, aka habitus, that essentially shape their cultural preferences, like how when you look at musical tastes, you can see one's upbringing. Looking at Aether Theater and their audiences, we can see how. Aether Theater is the project organizing music shows started in Hanoi, made by a group of young Vietnamese who want to bring different styles of music to their peers, particularly jazz, through the Jazzes series. The series numbered 5, 6, and 8 rearranged iconic Vietnamese songs from the 20th century. While Gen Zers were not even born yet, they gained a love for jazz fusing with these songs through their upbringing in the 2000s. Compulsory music lessons in school, and extra piano tutorial after. In the family, if your parents put Chick Công Sơn music on a cassette player, tune in to jazz on the radio, and your dad hums songs about Hanoi, but chances are that early exposure could get you hooked. It can get as early as when you were a baby. Listen to this song, Quê Nhà, which includes a folk lullaby that Vietnamese moms sings to their babies. That was then fused with jazz improvisation. And when Gen Zers grow up, the consumption of objectified cultural capital like Spotify album, YouTube recording, going to live shows, express their accumulated embodied capital, reinforcing their taste. Meet An Chen, a Gen Z saxophonist. She got her love for jazz from her Hanoian dad. And she
nghe rất nhiều thể loại nhạc, nghe cả nhạc jazz, nhạc P-pop, K-pop, R&B cũng nghe, nhạc gì cũng nghe hết.
Just like most young people, you see, they enjoy different genre. Listening to one kind on repeat, especially pop, is considered boring. Multiple and niche taste is superior and cool. This is called omnivorous taste, the increase in breadth and willingness to cross genre boundaries. Adding to Bourdieu's theories, musical taste is fluid and constantly developed, not just confined to social class. That unfolds through experience in consumption places, like Hanoi Rock City. A 12-year-old creative cultural hub of young people organizing weekly music show from all kinds of artists of many genres.
Metal, mình có jazz, mình có blues, mình có indie rock, indie đa số tất cả
all
các
bands
ban
and
nhạc.
artists in Vietnam has performed here. HRC is where cultivate young indie artists who like to experiment with diverse type of music. The audience gets to see their favorite artists and discover new ones, especially those who create fusion music. It brings the uniqueness that young listeners seek. For instance, Mèo Lạc started as a pop rock band but experimented with jazz fusion in Thành phố Đung Đưa, which got the band more new fans. Similarly, Jazz Glory Band started with jazz and then tried to fuse more with rock. Or Minh Tóc and Lam, fusing not only pop with jazz but also ballads and funk. Even when you go only for rock or indie pop, HRC could get you hooked on more. And that's how creative hubs get young Hanoians to like jazz fusion. They reinforce, cultivate existing genre preference, and form diverse cultural tastes. Jazz fusion being well received among Hanoian youth is significant as it shows the progress in Vietnamese cultural industry and popularization, which align with the cultural development strategy until 2030. And it's very promising for Hanoi to continue to grow as a creative city.